if you look at our existence in this world, you see that even with our tools, when they are used appropriately, in their proper way, to discover the truth about this world, you see that we still have a very long way to go. Things that the majority of the people, I think, they take for granted. They think that they are very well known by specialists and so on and so forth. The truth is, we don't know anything about those things. We have what they call in the philosophy of science, they call them models. They have a best model which is made up of theories and postulates. I create a hypothesis. I notice, I observe things, I go back and I think, what's the best explanation for this? That's my hypothesis. And I say, if my hypothesis is true, then this needs to be the evidence that corroborates it. Each time I find something that corroborates, it adds to the probability that maybe it does correspond to reality. And if someone shows something that contradicts, then that weakens. So it's never an absolute. It's always a probability. And tomorrow someone may come and say, I have a better explanation than yours, and that becomes a theory. Because your theory, from what you observed, your theory explains 60% of that, mine explains 70% of that. So science moves to that theory because it explains 70% and not 60%. That's how science works. And inshallah one day we'll talk more about the philosophy of science. But here are some examples of things that today, in the world of science, when human beings have used their reason and their empirical knowledge fully and well, correctly, you see that there are huge shortcomings. And these things are not known. The reality, the nature of these things is not known in science today. These are models. Tomorrow, any of these models could change. One of them is matter. What is matter made of? It's not known. In fact, if you really drill down and you see, there's a model that talks about atomic particles. When they go back to the particles that make up the atoms, it starts going, is it a string? And is the string only a vibration of energy? Or is there something else? That's one. That's one field completely unknown. What is matter made of? Energy. No one knows the essence, the nature of energy. The different forces. Until today, they have huge problems with a force like gravity. They can describe how it works, but they don't know what it is. And in fact, gravity, there's 4 big forces that we know of, human beings. There are 4 big forces that basically dictate how the universe works. 3 of them seem to work together, and then you have gravity, which does not work like the others. So why is that? It looks like there's a gap, there's something we don't know that makes these, there has to be a continuum, or these are all one thing but it manifests itself differently. We don't know. And gravity stands out in those forces. That's one thing. The origin of the universe, that's a well-known question. We spent lectures on that. The fate of the universe, we talked about that a few times. There's different theories. Some say there's a big crunch. Others say there's a equilibrium, so the universe will just go on like this forever and nothing will happen. The others say it's cyclical. It goes in a big bang and a big crunch again and again, and so on and so forth. And there's other theories. They have no clue. The size of the universe. They have no clue of the size of the universe. Probably the majority of you have heard that the universe has existed for 13.5 billion years, and this is its size, and so on. It's 93 billion years wide or big, and so on and so forth. That's actually only if you accept the very superficial understanding. If you really understand how the calculation is made, it's based on what we call our horizon, which is everything that we know is based on how much light has reached Earth. And then we estimate on how big the universe is. But now that they know the universe is expanding a lot faster than we ever thought, it means that what we're seeing from the universe is actually shrinking. We don't know everything that we've never seen, or that we will never see, because it's always going further away from us. The size of the universe, completely unknown, which causes huge problems. Like what? For instance, dark matter and dark energy. We have no clue what dark matter is. What's dark matter? for all of our physics to make any sense in the world, human beings have calculated how much matter there needs to be in the universe. The problem is that when they look at how much matter there is, they only find maybe 10, 15%, maybe less of that matter there. You see the galaxies, the stars, everything that we know, life, earth, everything that exists, makes up about 15% of how much matter there needs to be for the universe to make sense. So there's somewhere like 85% of the matter that we need for the physics to make sense that we have no clue about. We don't know where it is, but we add it in there to make the math work. This they call dark matter. We don't know what it is. We create theories about it. We don't see it, so we call it dark. We don't know how it works. We call it dark. That's dark matter. And of course, there's all the energies that go with dark matter. Okay? Antimatter. Antimatter is something that they can actually create. For every atoms are made up of particles. Every particle in an atom has characteristics. It has spin, it has mass, and so on and so forth. Antimatter is matter, the same particles that have the opposite characteristics. And when they do some experiments, they can create antimatter. So it actually exists. And it looks like in the universe, there is some antimatter that exists. The problem is that, as a physicist, you look at something, you look at this universe and you say, okay, the universe is mostly made up of matter, and there's a little bit of antimatter. Okay, why is there only a little bit of antimatter? It should all be the same. Or you need to be able to explain why there is more or less of one. What changed? If this is all random and it's happening on its own, you have to have a mathematical or physical explanation for this. They call this an asymmetry. There is a lot of matter and very, very little antimatter. And of course, if this were different, the universe would not exist, just so that you know. But we don't know why. No one has a clue why antimatter is the way it is, and there's this much of it. Okay, that's examples. The nature of space, I spent too much time on this. The nature of space, we don't know what space is made of. The number of dimensions, we don't know. We think, in theory, we all see the four, right? There's the 3 dimensions of matter, and then there's time. Those are the ones we feel directly. But in math, the majority of the math in string theory, for instance, they have 11 dimensions. Otherwise, the math doesn't make sense, and so on and so forth. What if one of the forces stopped? What would make it stop? How do we know that gravity will always be there in the universe? Or that any of the other, the nuclear forces or anything else will always be there in the universe? And what would happen if one of these ceased? We don't know. And so on and so forth. These are all examples. And then, so this is the stuff that we should be able to do something about when we combine our 5 senses with our reason. So here we are, as human beings, wanting to talk about the reality of the afterlife, when we really don't know that much about our own world, even the most fundamental basic things about it. Those things that science is, proud to say, this is what we're researching, and this is the latest that human beings are looking at and discovering, and this is the basic building blocks of our existence. We're not even really manipulating them, doing anything with them. It's just understanding them. We don't know anything about that. And if you want to take things that are purely philosophical, not empirical philosophical like the first ones, purely philosophical, problems like perception. How do human beings perceive? One of the biggest problems they have, the psychologists who are now working in teams of 10, 12, 15 fields of specialists together, how does reading work? When a human being sees a word, what is actually happening in the brain so that the word is interpreted in a certain way within a sentence, within a book, back into the experience of this human being to create meaning in the mind? No one knows. You may get the impression sometimes when they dumb it down that it's all well understood and easy. No one knows how it works. This is an example, perception. Another example, consciousness. No one knows what consciousness is. What's the difference between you and a stone? Is that you apparently have consciousness. You know, not only do you exist, and not only do you feel that you exist, but you actually even know. This is self-consciousness, self-awareness. You know that you exist. Maybe there are animals or entities, creatures, I don't know, maybe the leaf of the tree, maybe it doesn't know that it exists. It just exists. It feels alive, but it doesn't know that it's alive. It doesn't have the abstract cognitive power to think about its own existence like a human being. How does this work? We don't know. And yet, the issue is, here's where we see the limitations of human reason, of human knowledge. And this is where you see clearly that you cannot just take this and apply it to the afterlife and say, therefore I know everything that will happen to a human being after they die. How about you concentrate on your existence in this world and use your mind and your reason and your knowledge properly where it belongs, and you leave the rest to God. Okay? That's in short what we're trying to say here. So, are we saying that we completely neglect human reason? Of course not. First of all, we did agree and we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these faculties, these powers for specific reasons. To discover the world, to build and develop this world, to make our lives better. There is no issue with that. In fact, as we have said in the past, we have a religious obligation, we think, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these powers and these faculties, to use them in this way. Otherwise, this is being ungrateful. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rejects that. That's one. So the issue is, so long as we recognize where these powers, where these faculties begin and end. Okay? And in short, the Holy Quran talks about all of this. In one of the verses it says, and you have only been given a little bit of knowledge. And you have not been given any knowledge except a little. Surah Al-Isra. Okay? So, if we want now to talk about the afterlife, this was a huge, long introduction, but I think it's an important one for all of the next lectures that we're going to embark on this journey of exploring the afterlife. So, the first thing is, if we want to be objective, we want to be logical, scientific, clear in our thinking, and we want to present things that are conclusive and valid. In order to do that, we have to admit that our human reason is limited, constrained. We cannot rely on it to know the afterlife because we do not have direct access to it. That's one. We should be humble. We should recognize that limitation and that constraint. And from a religious perspective, we need to show a little bit of precaution. Before I start talking on behalf of God and how the afterlife is, I need to show a little bit of precaution. I should not speak on behalf of God or say this is how the afterlife is or isn't. I should go see what God has said about it and apply it. Okay? The last point is, and of course there's the responsibility that comes with that, especially beyond myself, but even for myself, if I actually believe that there's an afterlife, then depending on what I say about it, I may live differently. So there's a responsibility related to that. The other aspect, though, is that I can rely on knowledge to establish truths about the afterlife, except that those truths are very high level. They are not detailed. And so this is where I need to recognize that with reason, I am going to have limitations. So I have to, one way or another, rely on revelation. One way or another, rely on scripture. And once scripture comes in, I have to accept it for what it is. If it says something that I don't understand, my job is to try to understand it, not force my own interpretation on it, or not dismiss it, or say because I don't understand, therefore it's not true. Okay? But inshallah we're going to get more into that the next times we meet.